Lord Kethran attacked with all the fury of a dragon who had never known defeat. Fire erupted from his jaws in a torrent that should have turned Tayan to ash in an instant, and his claws slashed through the air with speed that no human should have been able to track. Tayan moved. He did not try to block the flames or match the dragon's strength, for such things were impossible for any human, no matter how skilled. Instead, he flowed around the attacks like water around stone, always a heartbeat ahead of claws that carved gouges in the marble floor. Always finding the spaces where fire was not, Kethran roared with frustration and pressed harder, his movements becoming faster and more savage as his fury grew. A claw finally connected, tearing through Tayan's climate suit and raking across his ribs in a wound that would have killed most creatures instantly. Tayan did not fall. He did not cry out. He simply adjusted his stance and kept moving, blood soaking through his torn suit, his dark eyes fixed on Kethran with an intensity that made the dragon's fire flicker. "Why will you not die?" Kethran snarled, and for the first time there was something other than arrogance in his voice. "Because humans do not know how to die," Tayan replied, his voice steady despite the wound that should have dropped him. "We are too stubborn, too stupid, too determined to simply stop when our bodies tell us we should." He told Kethran about human history as they fought, his words coming in short bursts between movements that kept him alive against impossible odds. He spoke of ancestors who had chased mammoths across frozen tundras for days without rest until the great beast collapsed from exhaustion. He spoke of soldiers who had continued fighting with wounds that should have been fatal, keeping their comrades alive through sheer refusal to accept defeat. He spoke of survivors who had crawled through deserts and oceans and mountains that should have killed them 100 times over. "We are not the strongest species in the galaxy," Tayan said, ducking under a claw swipe that would have taken his head. "We are not the fastest or the most powerful, but we are the most stubborn. And stubbornness has carried use through extinction events that destroyed species far mightier than yours." Kethran was beginning to tire. Siora could see it in the way his flames burned less bright, the way his movements lost their precision, the way his breathing grew ragged. Dragons were creatures of explosive power, capable of incredible destruction in short bursts. But they were not built for endurance. Humans were. "Your ancestors feared the night," Tayan continued, and there was something terrible in his quiet voice. "They huddled around fires and told stories of monsters lurking in the darkness. But our ancestors were the monsters, the things that followed prey until it collapsed, the creatures that never stopped coming, no matter how far you ran." He smiled, and blood stained his teeth. "I have been hit, burned, and wounded tonight in ways that would have killed most beings in this galaxy. And I'm still standing, still fighting, still waiting for you to make the single mistake that will end this." Kethran lunged with the last of his strength, a desperate attack fueled by fear rather than strategy. Tayan did not dodge. He stepped into the attack, accepting claws that pierced his shoulder, putting himself inside the dragon's guard where fire could not reach. His hands found Kethran's neck. There was a sound like dry branches breaking, the same sound Siora had heard in the dining hall what felt like a lifetime ago. Lord Kethran, the most feared warrior in the Draconis Imperium, collapsed to the floor with his neck broken in 3 places. Tayan stood over the body for a moment, swaying slightly, his climate suit in ruins and his body covered in wounds that would have been fatal to almost any other creature. Then he turned to Siora and smiled. "The throne is yours again, my Empress." He collapsed into her arms before she could respond. The days that followed passed in a blur of activity as Siora reclaimed her empire. Kethran's allies surrendered or fled, their support evaporating like morning dew once they learned their champion had been killed by a human in single combat. The story spread across the galaxy. growing more incredible with each telling until Yun Taeyun became something approaching legend. The human who had killed a dragon with his bare hands, the weak creature who had proven stronger than the mightiest warrior. Taeyun spent 2 weeks in the medical bay, his body healing from wounds that the physician said should have been fatal. Human biology is remarkable, the chief physician reported to Seora, amazement in his voice. His body has already begun repairing damage that would have killed a Caliph 3 times over. When Taeyun finally emerged, walking stiffly but walking nonetheless, Seora was waiting for him. "Come with me," she said, and led him to the great balcony overlooking the capital city below them. Millions of Caliph went about their lives, their flames burning bright against the volcanic landscape, their world unchanged by the political upheaval that had nearly destroyed it. "I owe you everything," Seora said quietly. "My throne, my empire, my life, and I do not know how to repay such a debt." Taeyun leaned against the balcony railing, looking out at the city with those dark, observant eyes that had seen so much. "You owe me nothing." For it did what any husband would do for his wife, what any partner would do for their companion. He turned to face her, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. This was supposed to be a political marriage, an alliance of convenience, but somewhere along the way, I began to hope it might become something more. Seora felt her flames stir, not with anger, but with something else entirely. "I thought you were weak," she admitted. "When you first arrived, I saw only a fragile creature in a cooling suit, a burden I had to bear for the sake of my empire. And now? Now I see someone who has strength I never knew existed. Strength that does not come from fire or claws, but from something deeper. Something I want to understand." She reached out and took his hand, her scaled fingers intertwining with his soft human ones. "Teach me," she said. "Teach me to be the kind of ruler who builds rather than burns, who earns loyalty rather than demanding it." Taeyun squeezed her hand gently. "We will learn together." 1 month later, Seora addressed her people from the great plaza of Paraxis, with Taeyun standing at her side and representatives from the outer territories filling places of honor that had been empty for generations. "I have been wrong about many things," she declared, her voice carrying across the assembled masses. "I believed that strength meant fire and claw, that power meant crushing all who opposed me, that an empress must rule through fear alone." She gestured to Taeyun, to the human who had changed everything she believed. "My husband has shown me another way. For humans do not conquer through superior force, but through adaptation, cooperation, and an endurance that outlasts any challenge they face." The crowd listened in silence, uncertain what to make of an empress who admitted her own mistakes. From this day forward, the Draconis Imperium will not merely tolerate its outer territories, but embrace them. For every world, every moon, every station will have a voice in how our empire is governed. General Cothnall, now wearing the insignia of an Imperial Council member, stepped forward to stand beside the throne, a former rebel, raised to the highest levels of power because an empress had finally listened. "Together," Seora concluded, "we will build something greater than any empire built on fear alone." Later, in the quiet of their private chambers, Seora asked Taeyun a question that had been burning in her mind. "What do humans call themselves in your own legends?" Taeyun thought for a moment, remembering stories passed down through countless generations on a small blue world very far away. "Survivors," he said finally. "We call ourselves survivors because that is what we have always been and what we will always be." He put his arm around her. This dragon empress who had learned to see beyond scales and fire. And now, together with the Caliph, we will survive whatever the galaxy throws at us. Seora leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his human heart, the warmth of his body that had nothing to do with fire. "Together," she agreed, and for the first time in her reign, she truly believed that the future held more hope than fear. The Dragon Empress had thought her human husband was weak. She had never been more grateful to be wrong. Taeyeon's plan was madness. Every Caliph warrior in the room said so, their voices rising in disbelief as he outlined what humans called guerrilla warfare. "You want us to hide?" General Cothnell demanded, her scarred face twisted with disgust. "To strike from shadows like cowards and run before our enemies can face us properly?" "I want us to win," Taeyeon replied calmly. "Catherine expects you to gather armies and march against him in open battle, where his superior numbers will crush you. But what if you do not give him that battle?" He had drawn diagrams on the table, showing troop movements and supply lines that most warriors would consider beneath their attention. Catherine's army is large, but it requires food, fuel, and ammunition. And all of these things must travel through supply routes that are guarded only lightly because no one has ever attacked them before. Seora studied the diagrams with growing understanding. You want to starve his army without ever fighting it directly. Hungry soldiers do not fight well, Taeyeon agreed. And soldiers who do not receive payment begin to wonder why they are fighting at all. The plan went deeper than simple raids. Taeyeon spoke of psychological warfare, of spreading rumors through the capital, of making Catherine see enemies in every shadow until paranoia ate him from within. "We let him know that you live," he told Seora, "but we do not let him know where you are or when you will strike. And every day that passes without an attack, his fear will grow, and his allies will begin to wonder if they chose the wrong side." The Caliph warriors struggled with these concepts. Their culture valued direct confrontation, the glory of combat, the honor of facing enemies eye to eye. Retreat was shameful. Deception was the tool of the weak. Deception is the tool of the survivor, Taeyeon corrected. And humans have survived things that should have destroyed us 1,000 times over, not through honor or glory, but through whatever methods kept our people alive. He looked at the gathered rebels, at the Empress, who had chosen to trust him, at the ragged army they were trying to build from scraps. "I cannot promise you glory in this campaign, but I can promise you victory if you are willing to fight the way I teach you." General Cothnell was the first to step forward. "My people have been dying in honorable battle for generations, and all it has earned us is more death. So show me this human way of war." They trained in hidden camps scattered across the outer territories, and Taeyeon proved to be a patient but demanding teacher. He showed them how to move without being seen, how to strike vital targets and disappear before reinforcements could arrive, how to use the enemy's strength against itself. He taught them to value information over aggression, to know their enemies better than those enemies knew themselves. "Every soldier in Catherine's army has a family," he explained, "a home they want to return to, fears they carry in their hearts, loyalties that can be tested. And when you understand these things, you do not need to defeat them in battle because you can convince them not to fight at all." The first raids were small, targeting supply convoys on remote routes that Catherine's generals had assumed were completely safe. Fuel shipments vanished without a trace. Food stores spoiled mysteriously overnight. Ammunition crates arrived at their destinations empty and everywhere. The same message was left behind. "The Empress lives." Catherine responded with fury, sending his best troops to hunt down the raiders. But Taeyeon had anticipated this. He is spreading his forces thin, Seora observed as they studied intelligence reports in their hidden command center. Every soldier he sends to chase shadows is one less soldier defending his position. That is the goal, Taeyeon agreed. We want him chasing ghosts while we build the force that will actually challenge him. Meanwhile, the rumors Taeyeon had planted spread through the capital like wildfire. The Empress had survived assassination through the protection of her human consort, a demon in human flesh who could kill with a touch. Those who had supported Catherine would burn when she returned. The usurper could not sleep, because he saw the human's eyes in every shadow. None of it was true. But truth mattered less than belief. Noble houses that had allied with Catherine began to reconsider their position, sending quiet messages to intermediaries, expressing their continued loyalty to the true throne. Soldiers in Catherine's army started deserting, slipping away in the night to return to homes they feared they might never see again. "You are destroying him without fighting him," Siora said, wonder in her voice. "How is this possible?" "Humans learned long ago that wars are won in the mind before they are won on the battlefield," Taehyung replied. "A general who doubts himself has already lost." And Catherine doubts himself more with each passing day. Their army grew as word spread, rebels and loyalists alike joining a cause that seemed to have something they had never seen before. Hoped the final phase of the plan required returning to Paraxis itself, slipping into the heart of enemy territory with a small team while Catherine searched the outer territories for armies that did not exist. "This is insanity," General Cosmo said. But she said it with a grin that showed all her teeth. "I love it." They entered the capital through the servant passages, routes that no noble would ever use or think to guard. Taehyung led them through corridors that he had memorized during his weeks of quiet observation, past checkpoints manned by guards who never thought to look twice at servants going about their duties. "You see what others overlook," Siora whispered as they moved through the shadows of her own palace. "Is this also a human trait?" "Humans learn early that survival often depends on noticing what others miss," Taehyung replied. "The predator hiding in the grass, the poison in the water, the lie in a friendly smile." They reached the residential wing without raising an alarm, and Siora felt her flames stirring as they approached the chambers where Kethron slept. Not the throne room where he expected an attack, not the military command center where his guards were thickest. His private chambers, where he was most vulnerable, most alone. "No witnesses," Taehyung said quietly. "No chance for him to rally his supporters or claim martyrdom. Just a simple end to a simple traitor." Siora looked at her husband, seeing the coldness in his eyes that she had glimpsed only once before, over the body of an assassin with a broken neck. "This is not honorable." "No," Taehyung agreed. "But it will end the war tonight rather than letting it drag on for years, killing thousands more on both sides. And sometimes the most merciful thing is also the most terrible." They moved forward together, the dragon Empress and her human husband, toward the confrontation that would determine the fate of an empire. Lord Catherine was waiting. He stood in the center of his chambers in full battle armor, flames already dancing along his claws, his eyes blazing with hatred and something else, fear. "I knew you would come this way," he snarled. "The servants talk, even servants who think they are being discreet. And I have been waiting for you, little Empress. You and your human pet." Siora prepared to unleash her fire, but Taehyung stepped forward, placing himself between her and the greatest warrior in the Imperium. "You do not need to protect me," she hissed. "I am not protecting you," Taehyung replied, and his voice carried something that made even Catherine hesitate. "I am protecting him from you, because if you kill him in anger, his supporters will call it murder rather than justice. But if I kill him in defense of my Empress, well, who expects anything honorable from a weak little human?" He looked at Catherine with eyes that held no fear, no hesitation. Nothing but the calm certainty of a predator who had already decided how this would end. "Come then, dragon, show me the strength of your fire." And Catherine, legendary warrior who had killed 100 enemies in single combat, felt something he had never felt before in the presence of prey. He felt doubt. The attack came without warning. One moment their ship was cruising through the darkness between stars, and the next moment alarms were screaming as rebel fighters emerged from behind a drifting asteroid. "Brace for impact," the captain shouted. But the first missile had already torn through their shields. Siora felt the ship shudder and groan around her as she fought her way to the bridge. Flames licking at her scales, smoke filling corridors that had been pristine moments before. Her personal guard fell around her, struck down by secondary explosions as the ship began to break apart. She found Taeyeon in the cargo bay, helping crew members into escape pods with calm efficiency that seemed impossible given the chaos around them. "The main engines are gone," he reported when he saw her. "We need to evacuate now." They made it to the last pod together, launching into the void as their ship exploded behind them in a bloom of fire and metal. The pod's guidance system was damaged, sending them tumbling toward the nearest planetary body rather than the designated rescue coordinates. Vareth Meyer grew large in the viewport, a frozen moon of ice and rock where temperatures dropped low enough to kill most warm-blooded species within hours. Even Kelleth struggled to maintain their internal fire in such cold. Siora looked at her husband in his thin climate suit and felt something she had never expected to feel for a human: fear for his survival. They crashed hard, the pod skidding across a plain of blue ice before coming to rest against a ridge of frozen stone. Siora kicked open the hatch and immediately felt the cold bite into her scales, stealing the warmth from her blood with a hunger that made her gasp. "We need to find shelter," she said, her breath already misting in the air. "My fire will not last long in this place." She expected Taeyeon to collapse, to shiver, to beg her for help as the killing cold destroyed his fragile human body. Instead, he climbed out of the pod and began gathering materials with quick, efficient movements. There, he pointed to a formation of rocks that created a natural windbreak. "We built there." She watched in amazement as he worked, using pieces of the crash pod to construct walls, creating a space small enough that body heat might actually accumulate when he finished the basic structure. He gathered dried vegetation that somehow survived in the sheltered cracks of the rocks and began rubbing two pieces of metal together. "What are you doing?" "Making fire." Siora almost laughed at the absurdity. "I can breathe fire, but I need to conserve my energy in this cold." "Then save your fire for emergencies," Taeyeon replied. And sparks began to fly from his improvised tools. Humans learned to make fire before we learned almost anything else. For it is the first great secret that separated us from the other animals on our world. Within minutes, a small flame flickered to life, catching the dry material and growing into a steady warmth that pushed back the deadly cold. Taeyeon fed the fire carefully, then produced ration bars from his suit and handed one to her. "Eat. You will need the energy to maintain your internal temperature." Siora took the food, studying her husband as if seeing him for the first time. "You were not afraid when we crashed." "I was terrified," Taeyeon admitted. "Fear is natural, for it keeps us alive. But humans have learned to act despite our fear rather than because of its absence." They huddled by the fire as the wind howled outside their crude shelter. And for the first time since their wedding, they talked, not as Empress and political husband, not as dragon and prey, just as two people trapped in a dangerous place with nothing to do but wait and hope. Taeyeon told her about Earth, about the billions of humans who lived there, about the cities that stretched to the sky and the communities that worked together to survive challenges that no individual could face alone. "Cooperation is our greatest strength," he said. "A single human is weak, easily killed, easily defeated. But humans together have conquered every environment on our world and spread to the stars." Siora found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, not even her closest advisors. She spoke of inheriting an empire at war, of being seen as too young and too female to rule, of the constant pressure to prove herself through conquest and destruction, because that was what Kelleth respected. "My council wants me to crush the outer territories," she admitted, "to burn their worlds and salt their fields until they beg for mercy." "And what do you want?" The question surprised her. No one had ever asked what she wanted. "I want an empire that does not need to be held together by fear," she said slowly. "I want subjects who follow me because they believe in my vision, not because they fear my fire." Tayan smiled, and in the flickering light of the fire he had made with his own hands, it looked almost beautiful. "Then perhaps we should find out why the outer territories want to rebel in the first place." Morning came gray and cold, and with it came the rebels. A patrol found their shelter and surrounded it with weapons drawn. Their leader, a scarred Kalith female, whose scales had faded to the dull color of someone who had not tasted proper heat in decades. "Empress Seora Vethkal," the rebel leader said, and her voice carried hatred earned through years of suffering. "Do you know how many of my people have died mining resources for your core worlds?" Seora prepared to fight, to summon what fire she had left and die with the dignity of an empress. But Tayan stepped forward, putting himself between Seora and the armed rebels. "General Yera Kothanal," he said, and the rebel leader blinked at hearing her own name. "Your son died in the conscription raids 8 cycles ago, and your daughter was taken 3 cycles later, and you have fought against the Imperium ever since. Not for independence, but for justice. How do you know this?" "Because I listen," Tayan said simply. "I read the reports that your Empress's advisors consider beneath them, and I pay attention to the people they have trained themselves to ignore." He turned to Seora, his eyes holding a challenge she had never seen before. "The outer territories do not want to leave your empire. They want to be part of it, truly part of it, with voices that are heard and lives that are valued." Seora looked at the rebels surrounding them, at the worn equipment and desperate faces, at people who should have been her subjects but had become her enemies, and she made a choice that would have shocked her council to their cores. "General Kothanal," she said, her voice carrying the authority of the throne even in this frozen place, "what would you say if I offered you a seat on my advisory council?" The rebel leader stared at her as if she had grown a second head. "I would say you are mad. Or lying, or both." "Perhaps I am mad," Seora admitted. "But I am not lying, for my husband has shown me that there is more than one kind of strength, and I am tired of ruling through fear alone." The negotiation took hours, but when it was finished, Seora had gained something more valuable than military victory. She had gained allies who believed in her. As they prepared to leave Vareth Minor with rebel escort, word came through the communications channels that made Seora's blood run cold. Lord Kethran had declared her dead and claimed the throne of the Draconis Imperium. "We must return to Paraxis," she said, her flames flickering with rage. "I will burn him from my palace and scatter his ashes to the stellar winds. He controls the military," General Kothanal pointed out grimly. "You have perhaps 1,000 loyal soldiers scattered across the territories, and he has millions." Seora felt despair creeping into her heart, but when she looked at Tayan, she saw him smiling. "What could possibly amuse you at a time like this?" "I have an idea," her husband said, and something in his eyes made her scales prickle with anticipation. "But I must warn you, my Empress, you are not going to like it at all." The assassin's body lay in the medical chamber, surrounded by Kelith physicians who had never seen such a clean kill. The neck was broken in 3 places, the chief physician reported to Seora, his voice carrying a note of professional admiration despite himself. Each break was precise, targeting the exact points that would cause instant death with no possibility of survival. "How long does it take to learn such a technique?" Seora asked. The physician exchanged glances with his colleagues. "Among our people, perhaps 30 cycles of dedicated training might produce similar results, but even then, the speed with which it was accomplished is beyond anything in our records." Seora turned to find Tayan standing quietly in the doorway, his climate suit repaired and humming softly, his expression as calm as if he had done nothing more remarkable than swat an insect. "Walk with me," she commanded, They moved through the palace corridors in silence, guards following at a respectful distance, until they reached a private garden where volcanic flowers bloomed in shades of orange and red. Siora stopped beside a pool of molten rock and faced her husband directly. "You will explain what I witnessed." It was not a request, as Yoon considered her for a moment, then nodded. "What do you know about Earth?" "Your homeworld," Siora said. "A small planet of moderate temperature. Unremarkable in every galactic survey." "The surveys are wrong," Taeyin said, and something in his voice made her scales prickle. "Earth is not unremarkable, and it is certainly not moderate. For by the standards of most inhabited worlds in this galaxy, Earth is a death world." Siora almost laughed at the absurdity. Death worlds were places like Korak 7, where acid storms could dissolve steel in minutes, or Nightmare Station, where the gravity alone crushed most species into paste. "Your world has liquid water and breathable atmosphere," she pointed out. "It also has predators in every environment," Taeyin replied. "Diseases that evolve faster than we can cure them. Natural disasters that kill millions. Temperatures that swing from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. And every creature on our planet, from the smallest insect to the largest beast, has evolved to kill or to avoid being killed." He began walking slowly around the garden, and Siora found herself following. "Humans were not the strongest species on Earth," he continued. "We could not outrun the predators that hunted us. We could not overpower the beasts that wanted to eat us. We had no claws, no fangs, no armor, no venom. Then how did you survive?" Taeyin stopped and looked at her with those dark eyes that she was beginning to realize held depths she had never suspected. "We refused to die." He explained things that made Siora's understanding of humans shift and crack. Like ice beneath fire, humans were persistent predators, he told her, meaning they would track prey across impossible distances, following for days without rest until the animal they hunted simply collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies could heal from injuries that would kill most galactic species, regrowing bone and tissue, and even recovering from damage to vital organs. They could function without sleep for extended periods, could survive in temperature extremes that would shut down other beings, could push through pain that would cause most creatures to simply stop functioning. "We evolved to endure," Taeyin said. "When we could not win through strength, we won through stubbornness. For we simply refused to accept defeat until either we succeeded or we died trying." Siora thought about what she had witnessed in the dining hall. The speed, the precision, the utter lack of hesitation. "The assassin was Kellis trained," she said slowly. "Faster and stronger than any human should be able to match. He expected me to freeze or flee," Taeyin replied. "That is what prey does when confronted by a predator. But humans have not been prey for a very long time. And we have learned that the moment between an attacker's first move and their completed strike contains infinite possibilities for those willing to act. Without hesitation." The investigation into the assassination attempt moved quickly after that. The assassin's identity was traced to a minor house with ties to Lord Kethran, the same noble who had laughed loudest at Taeyin's arrival. But Kethran was powerful, with allies throughout the military and deep roots in the noble houses. Moving against him without absolute proof would spark a civil war. "He will try again," Taeyin said during a private council with Siora and her most trusted advisors. "The failure will make him desperate, and desperate enemies make mistakes. We should strike first," Lord Marat growled. "Burn his holdings and scatter his house to the winds, and give him exactly the excuse he needs to rally others against the throne?" Taeyin shook his head. "No, we wait, we watch, and we let him reveal himself." Marat's eyes narrowed with contempt. "This is how humans fight? With waiting and watching?" "Humans fight with whatever method will achieve victory," Taeyin replied without heat. "Sometimes that means waiting, sometimes that means watching, and sometimes That means doing things that would make your boldest warriors weep with horror. Something in his tone made even Marak hesitate. In the weeks that followed, Siora found herself watching her husband with new eyes. She noticed how he memorized every face at court, tracking alliances and rivalries with a precision that matched her best spy masters. She noticed how the servants had begun to warm to him, sharing information freely because he treated them like people rather than furniture. She noticed how he had already learned more Caliph battle poetry than most of her nobles, quoting ancient verses with perfect pronunciation during formal events. "You are not what I expected," she admitted one evening as they reviewed intelligence reports together. Taeyeon smiled, a small expression that transformed his unremarkable face into something almost handsome. "No one ever expects us, for that is perhaps humanity's greatest advantage in a galaxy full of species who judge strength by claws and fire and size." He set down a report he had been reading. "The outer territories are the real threat to your empire, not Kethrin, for he is merely a symptom of a deeper disease. And if you want to save your throne, you need to understand why your own people are ready to rebel." Siora bristled at his presumption, but she had learned enough to listen rather than dismiss him. "Speak then. Come with me to Vareth Minor," he said. "Let me show you what your empire looks like from the edges rather than the center, and then you will understand what must be done." It was an absurd request. An empress did not travel to frozen moons in the outer territories, especially not with rebellion brewing. But Siora thought about the assassin's broken neck, about the depths she had glimpsed in her husband's eyes, about all the things she had assumed and all the ways those assumptions had proven wrong. "Very well," she said. "We leave at dawn." She did not know that Lord Kethran's agents were already tracking their movements, or that the journey to Vareth Minor would change everything she believed about strength, about power, and about the impossible human she had married. The throne room of Paraxis burned with eternal flames that danced along obsidian walls. And Empress Siora Vethkal sat upon her seat of volcanic glass with fury in her golden eyes. She had ruled the Draconis Imperium for only 3 cycles. Yet she had already crushed 2 rebellions and silenced a dozen challengers who thought a young female could not command dragons. But this insult was different. This insult came from the Galactic Coalition itself, wrapped in diplomatic language and delivered with smiles that hid their true meaning. "They demand a political marriage," our advisor Lord Marak growled, smoke curling from his nostrils as he read the message again. "To a human." The word hung in the air like poison. Siora's claws dug into her throne, leaving fresh gouges in the ancient stone that had held 100 emperors before her. She knew humans. Every species in the galaxy knew humans. They were the soft creatures from a small blue world, fragile beings who could not breathe fire or survive in proper heat, who lived barely a century before their weak bodies failed them. They had no scales, no claws, no natural weapons of any kind. How they had ever crawled out of their primitive mud and reached the stars remained one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries. "The Coalition says this marriage will prove our commitment to peace," Marak continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "They say Commander Yan Taeyun is a respected diplomat and strategist among his people." "A strategist," Siora repeated, and flame flickered between her teeth as she spoke. What strategy can a creature require when it cannot even fight? But she knew she had no choice. The outer territories of her empire whispered of rebellion, encouraged by coalition agents who promised support if they broke away from Caliph rule. A war with the coalition now would tear her empire apart from within. So she agreed. She agreed to marry a human, to let this soft creature stand beside her throne, to endure the humiliation for the sake of her people. The day Yan Taeyun arrived on Paraxis, the entire court gathered to witness what they expected would be a comedy. Siora stood at the head of the great hall, her scales gleaming like rubies in the firelight, her wings folded tight against her back. Her crown of black iron pressing heavy on her brow, around her stood the greatest warriors of the Imperium, each one capable of tearing through steel with their bare claws. And then he walked in. He was smaller than she expected, barely reaching her shoulder, wrapped in a silver climate suit that hummed with cooling technology. His skin was a warm brown color, his black hair cut short, his dark eyes calm and observant as they swept across the gathered Keleth. He walked without fear, which surprised her, but he also walked without power, without the predatory grace that marked a true warrior. Lord Kethran, the most powerful noble in the Imperium, laughed openly as the human approached the throne. "This is what the Coalition sends us?" Kethran's voice boomed through the hall, and several other nobles joined his laughter. "A creature that needs a machine just to survive our air?" Tayan stopped before the throne and bowed, a gesture of respect that seemed genuine rather than forced. "Empress Siora Vethkal," he said, and his voice was quiet but clear. "I thank you for accepting this alliance between our peoples, and I hope to prove worthy of the honor you have given me." His Keleth was flawless, spoken with an accent she could not place. Siora studied him with cold eyes. "You speak our language well for a human." "I have spent 6 months learning it," Tayan replied, "along with your history, your customs, and your poetry." More laughter from the court. "What use did a warrior race have for a scholar?" Siora gestured to a servant, not bothering to hide her disdain. "Show my husband to his quarters in the eastern wing." The eastern wing was the coolest part of the palace, barely warm enough for Keleth servants who had lost their fire with age. Everyone understood the insult, if Tayan understood it too. He gave no sign. He simply bowed again and followed the servant without complaint in the days that followed. Siora watched her human husband with growing confusion. She expected him to demand better treatment, to complain about the heat or the food or the way the nobles mocked him at every opportunity. Instead, he spent his time in the great library, reading texts that most Keleth warriors considered beneath them. He attended every court function, standing quietly at the edge of the room, watching everything with those dark, observant eyes. He asked questions that the nobles found childish. Why did the outer territories pay higher taxes than the core worlds? Why were their children conscripted at higher rates? Why had no representative from beyond the third ring attended court in over 50 cycles? He asks about politics like a merchant. Lord Marok complained to Siora after one such session. Does he not understand that strength is the only politics that matters? Siora did not answer. She had noticed something else about her human husband, something that disturbed her more than his questions. He never stopped moving every morning before dawn. She saw him from her window, running circuits around the palace grounds in the killing heat that should have left him gasping. He did strange exercises that bent his body in ways she had never seen, building no visible muscle, yet somehow growing stronger each day when he thought no one was watching. He practiced with wooden sticks that mimicked sword movements, flowing through forms that were completely alien to Keleth martial arts. "What is he doing?" she asked one of her guards. The guard watched for a moment and shrugged. "Playing, perhaps. The way their children must play." But Siora was not so sure. 3 weeks after the wedding, the court held a formal dinner to celebrate the harvest festival. Siora sat at the head of the table, Tayan beside her in his ever-present climate suit. The greatest nobles of the Imperium arrayed before them. Lord Kethran was telling a story about a battle he had won 20 cycles ago, his voice loud and boastful, when Siora saw something flash in the corner of her vision. A servant had moved too quickly. No, not a servant. The figure drew a blade from beneath their robes, a blade coated in something that glowed sickly green, and lunged directly at Siora's throat. She was fast. Every Keleth was fast. But she was seated, and the assassin was already moving. and she knew with sudden terrible clarity that she would not turn in time. Then Taeyeon moved. He did not stand so much as flow. Rising from his seat and intercepting the assassin in a single motion that Siora's eyes could barely track, there was a sound like dry branches breaking. The assassin crumpled to the ground, their neck bent at an angle that made even hardened Callith warriors wince. Taeyeon stood over the body, one hand still gripping the assassin's wrist. His breathing barely elevated. The entire hall had gone silent. Siora stared at her human husband, seeing him for the first time as something other than the weak creature she had dismissed. His eyes had changed. They were no longer calm and observant. They were something else entirely. Something that made the dragon in her blood whisper a warning she did not understand. "Are you injured, my Empress?" Taeyeon asked, and his voice was still quiet, still polite, as if he had not just killed a trained assassin with his bare hands. Siora could not find words to answer. She could only stare at the impossible thing her husband had just done and wonder what else she had been wrong about.